All right, good morning, everybody. Go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them. Should be below the video if you're on a smaller screen, to the right of the video if you're on a large screen. So it looks like we have one question here so far from Willis. So Willis says, I videoed my swing yesterday and saw my upper body thrusting downward, or excuse me, forward. Distance is good and consistency is terrible. Keeping weight back doesn't feel as powerful. Which part of the instruction should I refresh myself on? Your upper body thrusting forward. Forward in what direction is forward? Is that toward the target? Is that toward the ball? Um, so what I would say is if it's thrusting forward toward the target, so let's say you're kind of like this, that's a stable fluid spine, right? Because that's kind of like a reverse pivot, right? So if you're going like this, that's stable fluid spine. What we want to be doing is we want to be uh, basically shifting our body, our lower body forward, while our upper body stays back a little bit. That's going to allow you to get that spine angled away. What we don't want to do is this. What we want to do is this. So your body, the whole entire body is going to move forward some, right? But the lower body is going to move more toward the target than the lower body, right? That's part of how we're getting more of a spine angle angled away from the target as we're coming into contact. So the stable fluid spine would be the area where I'd be looking at. To get to the stable fluid spine course, you can click the instruction tab, then click the Taspigal system. And it's the first piece of the Taspigal system. You should be able to see a link to the stable fluid spine course there. So that's what I'd be checking out. All right, keep the questions coming. All right. So D Salt says, is the idea to feel or accomplish keeping the arms a long or stretched for the whole swing? The lead arm mostly is going to feel very long throughout the swing. It's okay if it folds a little bit as you get up to the top, right? So it's okay if when you get that change of direction, it folds a little bit, and then it's even okay if it kind of stays a little bit bent as we come through contact. But the trail arm is going to fold up, right? So when we go up to the top, my right arm, my trail arm here, is going to fold while my lead arm stays relatively straight or lengthened, right? And then as I come down, my right arm will unfold and lengthen as we come into contact. Will be fully lengthened out as we come into the straight line release, and then both of the arms will fold as we come around into the full finish, right? So as I come around, my right arm's going to fold, my left arm's going to fold. So just to recap, at address, arms are going to feel lengthened. As we progress to the top of the swing, my lead arm is still going to feel lengthened as my trail arm starts to fold as I get up to the top. Now, we don't want to fold it too much. Generally, there's going to be about a 90-degree fold in the lead arm. The reason why we wouldn't want it to fold too much is that when it folds too much, it typically gets into a position that makes you want to throw it out early. So generally what we want to do is we want to have around a 90-degree fold somewhere in that area, right? Too much is going to typically lead to issues, right? So about a 90-degree fold. And then as we come down, right, that right arm is going to start to lengthen a little bit as we come in, and then it's going to fully lengthen as we release the club. So both arms are going to be long as we release that club out in front. We want to release the club about 45 degrees out in front, right? And then after the release, right, the arms are going to generally start to gradually fold as we get up to the top. Both arms. All right. If you're just hopping on here, we're just waiting for more questions to be asked. So if you got questions, it's a good time to post them. If you're just hopping, excuse me, if you're just hopping onto the office hours, I'm just waiting for questions to be asked. So in the meantime, I'm just gonna be working on some of my other stuff I gotta do. So RX Mike says I'm working on hitting draws, having a lot of trouble getting the ball to start to the right. The more I count from, or the more I count from the inside, the more I hook left. Should I work on opening the face, rotation, or forward shaft lean? Thanks. So if you're having a hard time getting the ball to start to the right, then it's because your path just isn't enough into out. If you're just hooking it more when you try to swing more out to the right, then that's not literally what's happening. It may be what you feel you're doing, but really what's happening when you're hooking the ball more is you're just closing the face more. So what we want to understand is that in order to get the ball to start to the right, the club path needs to be to the right of the target. The club face needs to be closed to that path, but open to the target, right? So if we were to put some things down here, so let's say that this here, this pipe, let's say that is the target line, right? So that's that. If we extend that all the way out, that's going to be at the target. If I want to hit a draw, I need to have my club path. Let's say that's this orange stick on the ground, right? I need to have that club path going to the right of the target, and then let's see here, trying to find something that would be different. I don't have different color alignment sticks, unfortunately. Let's just use this. We'll use this and the face finder thing, and that'll be the club face. All right. Okay. So if I want to hit a draw that ends up on the target, this is my target line. Let's say this is my club path. My club face needs to be about right there, about halfway in between. So you can see how that's open to the target, but close to the path. That's going to produce a draw that starts right of the target and then draws back onto the target, right? Now, if you're having trouble getting the ball to start to the right enough, then you just don't have this relationship shifted out to the right enough. So you need to literally swing more to the right. If your ball is starting, let's say it's starting straight and then drawing too much to the left, that means that you need to shift all of that more to the right, right? And your club face is going to go with your path, right? The relationship of your face and path is going to remain the same. So basically what's happening is that when you're trying to swing out to the right, what's literally happening is you're just, if you're hooking the ball too much, what's literally happening is you're just closing the face too much. So what I would try to do is swing more out to the right, but I would try to feel like the face is more open, right? Instead of, because probably what's happening is you're probably trying to swing more out to the right, but you're trying to get the club face to point more toward the target as you're coming through contact. So keep that same relationship that you have now where you're getting the nice draw, but then shift that relationship, the face and the path, to the right, right? So I would try to feel like you're swinging more to the right and the face is, a little bit close to that path. So if you were to put numbers on it, right, you could say, okay, I'm going to swing 4 degrees into out. My club face needs to be 2 degrees open. That would mean that it's 2 degrees open to the target and 2 degrees close to the path. That's going to produce a draw, right? Right now, what's likely happening if you can't get the ball to start to the right and it's drawing is your club path is probably pretty close to 0, or maybe just slightly into out. Let's say your club path might be 2 degrees into out, but then your face is 0, right? That's going to produce a shot that's going to start at the target and then draw left of the target, right? So you just need to take that relationship and shift it, the face and path relationship, and shift it to right. So you need to swing more to the right, but you need to have your face go along with it. So I'd maybe try to feel like your face is more open as you're coming through contact. It's open to the target. The ball's going to start mostly in the direction of the club face. So if you want it to start to the right of the target, it needs to be open to the target, right? So hopefully that mindset of visualizing what you actually need to literally do can help you to do that. All right, keep them coming. So Troy says, through the top speed or the top golf system, I was able to get single or spine angle tilt at address and also add contact. For some reason, I have trouble maintaining the tilt angle at the top of the swing. All right, so let's talk about typically what's going on there. So either it's your hips going this way, right? So if you imagine if I'm straight up and down here, right? If my hips go that way, then I'm losing the spine angle, right? Now, if I'm straight up and down here, if my head goes that way, I'm losing the spine angle, right? So it's one or the other or a combination of the two. So what I would do is I would look at your swing on video, which I assume you have since you know that these spine angles are, and I would draw a line on the outside of your trail hip, right? So it'd be here, you would draw a line outside your hip. And I would look at the top of the swing, where is your hip in relationship to that line? Now, it's important that the camera is still, so I wouldn't have someone holding the camera. I would use like a phone tripod or something like that. You can get them on Amazon. They're relatively cheap. You can spend a lot of money on them too, but phone, I mean, I got a phone tripod for like $20 on Amazon. Tripod, cheap tripod, has a phone mount on it, works just fine. So basically, what you would want to do is have the camera still and then look and see if your hip is moving into that line. If your hip is moving into that line, then it's the hip slide, right? What we want to have happen is we actually want to have a little bit of a gap when we go up to the top between your hip and where it was at the start of the swing. When you look at the best players, typically what you're going to see, if you draw that line, is you're typically going to see them in the very start of the backswing. You're typically going to see them nudge into that line a little bit. You're going to typically see about a 1-inch movement away from the target to start the backswing. Now, why would they do that? The reason why they do that is to shift pressure into the trail foot, right? And the only way we can shift pressure is to actually shift the weight, to shift the mass in that direction, right? So boom, I'm just going to go. And it doesn't take a lot, right? You can just stand there like this right now. And if you get some momentum and shift your hips to the right hard, you can put a lot of pressure on that trail foot. I mean, that's all I'm doing is you just want to almost imagine like there's a bathroom scale underneath your foot with the old school needles on it. And you're trying to make that needle jump, right? So that's all it is. It doesn't need to be this, right? It's just a little bit of a movement, right? Now, as soon as I start feeling that pressure into the trail foot, I'm going to start pushing hard with my trail foot and pushing my hip back and around, right? So I'm going to be here. I'm going to be pushing my hip back and around. And I'm going to be actually trying to move my hips a little bit toward the target as I get up to the top, right? So a great drill to work on this is one of my favorite drills for working on this kind of stuff is a chair drill where you take a chair and you put it on the outside of your hip, right? So the reason why this is great is because it gives you instant feedback. A lot of my favorite drills are just drills that give you instant feedback. So that way you can put in a lot of reps. The key to improving is to consistently put in a lot of reps over time, right? So if you're now video is sometimes something that is very necessary and in a requirement a lot of times to be able to see if you're doing something. But if we can do something where we can minimize the amount of video that we have to use. Now you still want to use video just to make sure that you're doing what you think you're doing. But if we can use instant feedback mechanism, that's really the best thing. So this gives you instant feedback. Based on what you're feeling with that chair, it's going to tell you right away whether you're doing it correctly or not, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to set up here and you're going to set up with that chair just touching your hip, right? To start the swing, you're just going to nudge the chair. And again, that's just shifting the pressure into my trail foot to start the swing. Then you're going to go to the top and you want to have about a hand thickness. So that might be roughly 1.5 inches, depending on how big your hands are, I guess. But if you have big hands, you're probably a bigger person and you probably need a little bit more of a gap there. But generally, you're going to have about a hand width of space, right? So basically at the top of the swing, you should be able to snugly fit your hand between your hip and the chair, right? That's going to you can see there when I'm in this kind of position, look at where I am. I have not moved my head much, right? And you can see how I have a nice spine angle at the top of the swing. So I got good spine angle here, and then I have a nice spine angle at the top of the swing. right? So what I would do is I would start out with some pausing reps, do lots of reps where you pause at the top, get comfortable with it. Then I would do lots of reps where you go really slow and you do fluid swings, so no pause at the top, right? And then once you get to where you can do that fairly easily, then I would just gradually build up the speed. So really slow might be like 25% speed at first, then you work up to 50% speed, get to where you can do that. Then you work up to 75% speed, get to where you can do that, right? So you want to get your momentum moving toward the target as you get up to the top of the swing. So that would be what you would do if it's the hips. Now, if it's the head, right? And now, if you draw that line on there and you see you're in a good spot, but your head's going this way, right? There's a couple things that could be going on there. So one could be, this is something that I see quite often is that we try to keep the flex in the trail leg, right? So if you try to keep the flex in the trail leg, a lot of times what will happen is you will, in an attempt to lengthen the swing, you will reverse spine angle, right? So if I'm here and then I reverse spine angle, you can see how my swing, it gets longer. The club gets closer to parallel, right? So that's what a lot of people do. So make sure that you're unlocking your lower body, letting your legs, let your trail leg straighten out some as you get up to the top. So that way because a lot of times what happens is that people will, they'll keep the legs flexed as they get up to the top, and they'll kind of do this action, right? And then they kind of go up to the top, and it's kind of like this, right? So that would be one thing I would look at. Now that if you are turning and everything and you're getting everything good, but you're just leaning toward the target at the top, then what you may need to do is what I would call the fault, feel, reel approach. So what that means is the fault is basically your spine is extending toward the target too much. The feel would be that you're staying in, you're keeping your spine more flexed as you go up to the top and really exaggerate it, right? So the fault is this. The feel might be this, that you're actually moving your head way off the ball and your chest is kind of over your trail leg, right? That would be kind of the feeling that you would want to have, right? And hopefully the reel would be more like this, right? So the fault is this, the feel is this, and then the reel is hopefully that, right? So fortunately with the head moving, now if you're really creative, you could maybe be able to set up, a feedback mechanism. So one could be something like this. This is the swing plate. I can put a link in the video or in the chat where you can get one of these. But basically what this is, it's a heavy plate that holds an alignment stick. They also sell an extension for this so they can be longer. But if you're really creative, you could maybe be able to get this to where it's like this. So what you could do is you could set this up. Basically, I'll show you kind of the other angle. So you can I know I don't have a ton of space in here, so it's hard to see exactly what I'm doing. But basically, you would set it up out here like this, right? And you would basically have it like this, right? So if you reverse spine angle, right, your head's going to move into that. So that'd be something that you could do. A little bit harder to set up if you don't have something like this. But like I said, they have an extension. You could also take rubber bands and maybe connect a couple alignment sticks together, or maybe take a rubber band and kind of cinch this down to where it's kind of like that, and angle this up to where it would be like touching your ear at address. And I would go up to the top and get to where, if you kind of look at it from this angle, sorry, trying to get this to move, stuck on my carpet. There we go. So if you look at it from this angle, you maybe have it like this, right? And you would have it kind of come up and being right where your head is, and you'd go up to the top and you would be not touching it, right? Whereas if you reverse spine angle, right, if I go like that, I'm going to be going into it. So that'd be a way that you could set up an instant feedback mechanism, but I know that's not as easy to set up as something like a chair or something like that. But yeah, I'll put the link to where you can get a swing plate. Those things are awesome, by the way. If you're practicing indoors, that's one of my favorite things to have because there's just so many things you can do with it. Just to also, it's really one of my favorite shallowing drills because it also helps you to stay. So let's get into that a little bit because I see we have a few more questions. So I'll get to the more questions here in a minute. But I think this is a really great drill that I want to share with you all. So, in the 20-minute shallowing fix, we have the drill where you put the impact bag in the way, or you can just put anything in the way that just gets in the way. You put it behind and to the right of your ball. Well, that's good, and it does get you to shallow out the club, but there's one little problem with it. The problem with it is that you can maybe shallow out the club in a way that you don't necessarily want to, or it would be better to do it this way than to not shallow out the club at all. But it would be better if we stayed in our posture a little bit. So this would be kind of like, I would say that the 20-minute shallowing fix drill where we're putting the impact bag in the way, I would say that's level 1 to get you to shallow out the club. This would be like level 2 to get you to shallow out the club and also stay in your posture, right? So the reason why this helps, basically the way you would set it up is you would have this set up at the same line angle of the club. It's going to be roughly around 60 degrees. And it's going to be behind the ball, 2 or 3 feet, and then about 6 inches outside the ball. So this has a tube that you can put the alignment stick through that extends out here, and then you just put the ball about 6 inches inside of that. It'd be pretty close to even with the edge of it. And basically what you do, if I'm doing, so let's pretend that this is the impact bag. All right, let's pretend like I'm doing the impact bag drill, right? Let's just put that aside for now. Let's say I'm doing the impact bag drill, right? And I got that impact bag behind and to the right of my ball, right? Well, this does force me to shallow out the club. But what I can do is I can come down steep early and then shallow it out late, right? And come up out of my posture and shallow out the club. Now, that is 100% better to do than coming down steep. But there are some problems with that. I will tell you, I would much rather have the golfer that does that kind of shallows it out but stands up out of it, than to have the golfer that stays in their posture and comes down steep. Because the golfer that comes up out of the posture and shallows it is at least going to be able to hit functional golf shots. They're going to be more consistent than the golfer that comes down steep and comes over the top, even though they're staying in their posture. That's what we have to be careful of. Posture is definitely something that you want to do in the swing, but there's give and take there, right? If you're staying in your posture, you got to be doing other things as well to be able to hit good golf shots, right? So like I said, I would say this is more level 1, but that makes it to where I can kind of stand up on a posture and get the club to work from the inside, all right? So now enter level 2, where now we're able to stay in our posture a little bit. That's where this drill comes in. So if I do that same thing, right, where I come up out of my posture to shallow the club, well, look where my hands go. My hands go over that stick, and the club may even go over that stick, even though this part may be under it, or it could get under it if it was way back here. But you can see how the club is shallowing, right, but I'm swinging over it. But if I go here and I get it underneath, right, look at what I have to do. I have to flex my hips. I have to stay in my posture, and that's a better thing to do. So that's why I really like this swing plate. Now, if you practice outdoors, you don't need the swing plate. You can just stick it in the ground. But if you practice indoors, like here, I can't stick an alignment stick into my carpet, right? Or if you're practicing at a range that's like concrete with mats, you're not going to be able to stick a stick into that, right? So that really helps because it's just a heavy base that holds the alignment stick, and you can hold it at whatever angle you want. So it's awesome. I'll quit my sales pitch there. I'll put a link if you guys want to pick up one of those. And there's also a video on this page if you want to check out what Clay has to say about it. Let me, sorry, I'm just trying to find the link here real quick. But yeah, highly recommend it. Putting the link in the chat now. Full disclosure, we do get a small commission from if you buy from our link. But honestly, we could sell thousands of training, maybe not thousands, but hundreds of training aids. And we only really, we don't technically sell them, but we could team up with every, training aid manufacturer, out there and sell you stuff that, or recommend stuff that just doesn't work so we can get a commission. But we don't do that. We test everything that gets sent to us. And if we run across something that we think is really great, we're going to share it with you guys. And if we happen to make a couple bucks from you guys getting a great product, it's kind of like a win-win-win situation, right? You guys get a great product that will hopefully help you, right? We get a small commission back, right? And then the company also sells one. So everybody wins. Commerce at its finest, right? So highly recommend it. I wish I actually had it a long time ago when I was working more on my game. Don't work as much on my game now, but yeah. Let's keep going. It looks like we got some more questions in there. All right, so Alan S says, any tips for getting my hands in front of my trail leg at last parallel? Yeah, so typically when people, so basically what you're talking about is essentially an early release, right? So if you're here, right, and your club is like this, that essentially means that you're releasing the club early, right? So there's two major reasons why this happens. Now, this may or may not necessarily apply to you, but I would say in at least 80% of cases, it's one or both of these things that is causing this. So number one is, and these are in no particular order, I would say they're both equally happen. But the first one would be coming down steep. Now, why on earth would that have anything to do with releasing the club early? Well, a lot of times what we do in the swing, in our downswing, is a reaction to where the club is in the start of the downswing. And what we're doing is we're trying to get the club to work through contact to be able to get the ball to go in the direction that we want, right? So if I am starting down steep, right? So if I'm here and I'm coming down steep, then I need to get that club to shallow out somehow, right? And the solution that most golfers come up with, and it's pretty much the only viable solution from this position coming down the downside, if we start down steep, is to stand up out of it, right? So if I'm here and then I stand up, look what happens to the club. It shallows out, right? The problem is, the good part is that it shallows out. The problem, the bad news, right, is that I had to stand up. And when I have to stand up, I have to release the club earlier to get the club to the ball, right? And I'm also not going to be able to rotate through the shot as well, because if I'm extending my hips, I've used basically my powers of rotation too early in the swing. So what that means is, in the start of the downswing, what we want to do is flex the hips. That initiates the rotation, and then you finish the rotation with the extension. If you initiate the rotation with the extension, then you have nothing left to rotate the hips except for the momentum of the club. And that's when your arms in your club, when you've already released it, right? So what that means is I get here, right? And then the momentum and forces that are acting on my arms and the club brings my body all the way around into a full finish, right? So what we want to do is we want to get that club shallowing earlier, so that way I can flex my hips, right? And I can initiate my rotation there and then turn through the shot. And if I'm able to flex my hips, I'm able to move my body down lower. I'm going to be forced to release the club later. Now I can get into this kind of position and release it later. Whereas if I have to stand up out of it, right, by the time I get to here, it's going to be an early release. So one reason could and might be that you're starting down steep, right? So that'd be one. Two is the club face is open. So one thing we want to understand with how we open and square the club face is lag opens up the club face, which would mean if I'm coming down here, I'm going to have more lag, right? This is less lag. This is more lag, right? So lag opens the face while release closes the face. So if I have this club face open as I'm coming down, then I need to do something to get it closed. Or to get it from open to square. So I need to get it more closed coming into contact. I'm going to need to release the club early to be able to do that, right? So if I'm coming down, and a good way to kind of look at this is to look at where your club face is at last parallel in the swing, right? So last parallel in the downswing, if you look at it from down the line, If any part of this club face is pointing, so if you look at the leading edge, right? So here's the leading edge, right? If you look at that, if any part of that is pointing up, right, then that's an open club face. This would be kind of straight up and down. This would be angled down. When we look at the better players, what we're going to see is that that club face is going to be angled down some amount, right? Now, some players are more shut than others. So the more it's angled down, the more shut it is. And there's some players that are pretty close to straight up and down. So an example of that would be like an Adam Scott. Adam Scott's pretty close to straight up and down. Victor Hovland's very angled down. Is more shut face. So that has to do with how much shaft lean you have. Adam Scott doesn't have near as much shaft lean as Victor Hovland does. And he also does things with his wrists to get the club face more closed as he's coming into contact. If that's something you naturally do, then great. But I would venture to say that club face is probably angled up toward the sky in some amount. So if my club is angled up toward the sky in some amount, I'm going to have to release it to square it up. I'm not going to be able to, I'm going to be preemptively kind of trying to get that club face closed, right? So those would be the two reasons. Now, if you're looking for something to work on to help with those, we just so happen to have a course that addresses both of those things. It addresses shallowing out the club and addresses getting the club face more closed via a stronger grip or wrist angles. That's our 20-minute shallowing fix, right? So if you're looking to get into that position, who was it that asked that? Alan. I would first recommend working through the 20-minute shallowing fix, and then basically working through the Todd Spiegel system, because the other reasons would be within the Todd Spiegel system. Why you have an issue. If your spine angles are off, that's going to tend to throw off how you release the club, right? If you're not getting a full shoulder turn, you're going to tend to try to get speed by releasing it very early. So getting a full shoulder turn is a big part of that as well. If you are casting the club in the very start of the downswing, it's going to be near impossible to get to not have it, like this by the time you get to your, right? So the top speed lag course. The compression line, that's the line that goes from our lead ankle, lead hip, lead shoulder. If you're way bumped out with your hips, that's going to stall your rotation. When you stall your rotation, you're going to tend to release it early, right? And then lastly, just working on getting the club to release itself. So let's say all those, you're putting your body in a position, you're doing everything else you can do to get the club to release out front, but it's more just your hands and your swing isn't synced up properly to get that to release out in front. That's the straight line release course, right? So number one thing I would do is the 20-minute shallowing fix. Beyond that, it's going to be the Todd Spiegel system. Now, if I could see your swing and look at it, I could pinpoint and tell you exactly what you need to and get you on the right track very quickly to get into that position. But if I can't see your swing, then unfortunately, I can only kind of give you, what my best guess is as to what's going on. So, but I do have one spot available right now, or at least I did, I think at the beginning of this office hour. So if you'd like me to take a look at your swing, you can sign up for the unlimited swing reviews. If you don't see a spot available, no worries. Just click the to join the waiting list, and then whenever I open up spots again in the future, you'll get an email before everybody else, so that way you can sign up at that time. I think I may be opening up spots next week, but I'm not 100% sure. It depends on how things go. All right, let's keep going. And where you can sign up for the swing reviews, not sure if I mentioned it, but it's above. It should be above the video. Should be a link there. You can click on. All right, let's keep going. So RX Mike says, I'm using a putting mirror, trying to get the line on the ball to roll and over in like the pros. No matter what I try, the line still wobbles. How can I make a pure putt? So basically what I would make sure of is one, is that you have the line kind of set up straight up and down. I find that some people, the line will be kind of set up a little bit off, right? So make sure it's set up straight up and down. That'd be one. Two would be to make sure that you are hitting the ball in the center of the face. So if you have a putting mirror, most likely what you have are T notches in it where you can put a T to kind of do a gate drill. So basically you would have a T kind of where my fingers are, and you would have to putt through that gate, right? And if you were to hit, the T's, right, that means you're hitting it off center. So if you make an off center strike on the putter face, it will tend to make that wobble because the face will twist slightly and it won't deliver a square face, right? You also might be, cutting across the ball. If you cut across the ball, you have an open, it's kind of like just like if you're hitting a slice, right? But in putting, right? If you're cutting across it, or if you're swinging too much to the inside with a closed face, that will also throw things off, right? So those would kind of be the things I'd be looking at. So yeah, number one, make sure you have it set up straight up and down. Number two, I'd set up a gate drill to make sure that you're hitting it in the center of the putter face. And let's say that you got it straight up and down, you're hitting in the center of the face, then that narrows it down to one thing, right? It's your face and your path are off. You're either cutting across it, or you're either coming too much to the inside with a closed face, or too much to the outside with an open face, right? So what I would do is I would play around with almost trying to hit a draw or a fade with your putter, right, and see if that makes it wobble, and then kind of just tone it down a little bit. So Bill Williams says, do you start hip movement to left before you reach the top of the swing? Yes. You may have missed what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the chair drill. So the chair drill is basically where you take a chair and you set it. So someone was talking about how they weren't able to get into the good spine position at the top. It's going to be from either sliding the hips or the head going too much this way, or a little bit of both. So basically, it's most likely hips. That's the most common thing that I see. But if we do this chair drill correctly, right, what we're going to do is our hips are going to move to our trail side about an inch early, right? So you're going to nudge the chair to start. And then as you get up to the top, you're actually going to create some space between your hip and the chair. It's going to be about a hand width. So your hips are going to be moving a little bit. Your momentum is going to be moving a little bit toward the target as you get to the top. Then it's going to continue to move that way in the downswing. Basically about halfway back, this is as far to my trail side as I'm going to be, right? So I nudge the chair. And as I get to about right here, this is as much pressure as I'm going to be putting into my right foot at any point in the swing. And then I'm going to be moving it into my lead foot as I get to the top, and then continued in the downswing. So I would kind of think of it like throwing a ball, right? If I'm throwing a ball, right, my arm's going to be going back as my body's going forward, right? That's going to be the most powerful and athletic way to throw a ball. Same thing in the golf swing. Essentially what you're doing with the golf swing is you're throwing the club into the back of the ball. That's essentially what you're doing, right? So it's a very similar motion, right? So what I would try to think about is that I'm throwing that club into the back of the ball. So I want to feel like my body's going forward as my arms are going back, right? Well, if you, let's say you're fully loaded at the top and you don't have any momentum going toward the target, that'd be the equivalent of throwing a ball like this, right? That's not very powerful and athletic, is it? Right? We want our arm going back as our body's going forward. So Dan C says, how do you hit greenside bunker shots out of wet sand? So you're going to do it very, very similar to what you would out of normal kind of fluffy sand. The only difference is that you want to let the club dig a little bit more, because wet sand is going to be a little bit more resistant to digging. So let's go over what a normal bunker shot was, and then the adjustments you would make for more wet sand, right? So if I'm hitting a normal bunker shot, I'm going to use a greenside bunker shot. I'm going to use a lofted wedge, right? 56, 60 degrees, something like that. I'm going to open up the face, probably about 45 degrees, somewhere in that area. Basically, I want that club face to be kind of pointing up to the sky as I'm laying it on the ground here. So they'd be kind of pointing up to the sky here. And what I'm going to do is I want to come in and enter the sand behind the ball and have that club glide through the sand. The reason why I want to have that club face wide open is because I want to use the bounce of the club, right? So if I have the club face square, and let's say I'm setting up with a little bit of shaftling, that leading edge is going to hit the sand. That's going to make it want to dig into the sand. I don't want the club to dig at a fluffy sand because the club's going to get stuck in the sand. So if I open up the club face, well, now you can see that this bounce, right? This part is going to be hitting the sand, and that's going to allow it to glide through the sand. So a good way to think about it is like water skiing. If you're water skiing, you want the nose of the skis out of the water so that way you can glide on top of the water. If you get the nose of the skis down into the water, the skis are going to dive down into the water, right? So that's basically the same way the bounce works, right? So we want to open up the club face, and we want to hit, a few inches behind the ball. We want to swing pretty hard because you're not really hitting the ball, you're hitting the sand first, and that sand's going to provide some resistance, and that all that energy from the club head's not going to be transferred to the ball. That's going to be some of the energy because there's going to be resistance from the sand, right? And it's going to be more of a wristy motion, right? It's going to be very armsy and wristy, right? Very, very different than normal swing. Normal swing is going to be more rotation through, hands in front. We don't want to do that with a bunker shot. If we get the hands in front too much, that's going to eliminate the bounce. We want to feel like we're coming through like this, right? This is the one place in golf where you actually want an early release. That's actually better to have an early release, right? So that's how you hit a normal bunker shot. Now, in wet sand, that sand is less resistant, right? It's not going to want the club to dig as much. So what we're going to do is we're just going to tone down on some of those things. We're going to tone down on how open the face is, right? We're not going to swing as hard because we're going to be hitting more of the ball. We're going to be able to transfer more of the club to the ball. Now, unfortunately, not all wet sand bunkers are created equal, right? Some are like concrete, right? Some are super hard, and you're going to be toning. You might come in with almost more like a square club face, right? And some are just a little bit wet and just need to have that adjustment. So the only way to really get a feel for that is to practice it. You got to learn by doing in that situation. So what I'd recommend doing is go to your practice, bunker area, and might even be good to go there after a heavy rain or something like that. If the bunkers are normally fluffy, or you can bring like some water with you and pour it in there. See what it is. If it's just wet, see what it, pour some water in there, pack it down a little bit and see how it reacts. Pour some more water in there, pack it down as tight as you can, see how it reacts, right? So it's really something you got to kind of learn by doing a little bit. But essentially what you do is a normal bunker shot, but you're just going to tone down on the things, that get the club to glide through the sand. You're going to, ease up on the opening of the face, essentially, so that way the club can dig a little bit. You may even feel like you're hitting down on it a little bit more to get the club underneath the ball, right? Whereas in a fluffy sand, right, you probably wouldn't need to do that because the sand is fluffy. It's just going to get into it, right? Whereas if you have wet sand, right, if you were to not hit down on it, it may bounce off of it and you may blade the ball, right? So it's just toning down on some of the things that you do to allow the club to glide on the sand. So Troy says, on my backswing, I tend to lean forward towards the toes. Is that a problem? It can be, because basically that means that you're out of balance, right? So if you're going up to the top of the swing, what's most likely happening is you're probably moving your hips forward and your upper body away, and you're putting pressure into your toes to keep from kind of falling forward, right? So if I'm like this, right, I got to put a lot of pressure into my toes to keep from, because if I'm like, if I'm like this and I don't push for my toes, I'm going to fall forward too much, right? So I would just look at your swing on video and see, okay, am I moving my hips forward a lot and my upper body away? And if I do that, the position at the top that we want to be in is kind of more like this, right? We want to turn our hip back and around. We want to have some good shoulder tilt as we get up to the top, right? If I go up to the top and my shoulders are level, it's going to be very difficult for me to get into a good impact position. It's not saying it's impossible. I just don't see a lot of golfers recovering from that top of the swing position. Typically what golfers will do from a position like this, where their shoulders get level, is they'll just throw their arms down and they'll come down like this, right? That's typically the path of least resistance, and that's usually what we're going to do. So if we flex our hips a little bit and get our shoulders tilted down, this is a much easier way or a much better way to work down to the ball. That's what we see the best players doing. So odds are you're probably standing up out of it a little bit. A chair that you can, or a drill that you can do is a chair drill. Put a chair behind you, right? Have your hips kind of on it. At the top of the swing, you want to have your right hip on it. At impact, you want to have your left hip on it. So that'd be like a quick drill that you could do to help you to stay in better balance. So WWCA says, does that chair drill front side weight shift apply to driver? Yes, it's just your stance is going to be wider and you're going to push harder. So you're not going to shift as far forward, right? So here would be kind of the difference between the two. Here would be an iron, right? I'm going to have a little bit narrower of a stance. Generally, and these are just generalities, doesn't mean you have to do exactly this, but you can play around with stance with, see what works best for you. But generally, what I like to see with an iron is I like to see the stance to be middle of the ankles, about shoulder width apart. So if you were to draw a line straight down from my shoulders, it would go down through the middle of my ankles, right? That would be like the width of the stance. I think for most people, this is a good starting point. It doesn't mean that you may not be better wider or narrower. It just means that it's a good starting point. So what we would do is we would be here, we would create that width, and we would move our body more forward as we're coming through, right? So your compression line would be more straight up and down. So again, compression line would be ankle, hip, shoulder. That the line that's drawn through those body parts at impact, that would be your compression line. So that'd be more straight up and down at impact with an iron. Now for a driver, I'm just going to be a little bit wider, right? This is going to be more like inside of feet, shoulder width apart, right? So I'm going to be doing the same thing where I go up the top and then I'm going to be pushing my body, I'm going to create that gap. But when I shift forward, right, because my stance is wider, I'm going to have more to push against, right? Because my leg is at an angle to be able to push against. So I'm going to be pushing more away. So there's just not going to be as much lateral shift. I'm going to be pushing harder away to stay behind it to hit up on the ball. Because that's really the big difference between your iron and your drivers, where you're contacting the ball in your swing arc, right? If we kind of look at the swing arc is this hula hoop here, right? If the swing arc is this hula hoop, let's say my right hand is the ball, my fist is the ball, this would be like an iron. I'm hitting the ball this way, the club's working down, it contacts the ball about right here, a little bit before the bottom of the arc. Let's say where this tape is the bottom of the arc. That's going to be a few inches and slightly below the ball, right? That's going to allow me to make ball, then turf contact and take a divot, right? For a driver, right, my contact is going to be up here, right? I'm going to let the club bottom out before the ball, then it's going to work up into the ball. That's going to allow me to get higher launch, lower spin, which is what we want for distance with the driver, right? And really, if we could hit our irons this way, we would hit our irons this way as well. But irons, we're going to be hitting off the ground. They're designed to be hit off the ground, right? So that's why we have to hit down on the ball with the irons and up on the ball with the driver. So that's why with the driver, we're going to have a wider stance. So that way we can push against it more to stay behind the ball to be able to hit up on it, right? So we're still going to get our momentum moving forward a little bit. We're still going to create that gap at the top. It's just that because our stance is wider, we're going to have more to push against, and then we're going to push hard away. And now, so this would be like, so here would be my stance, impact position with an iron, right? Here would be my stance, impact position with the driver. You can see how I'm more angled away as I'm coming in because I'm wider. All right, so Joe B says, Clay recently sent a video tip to use a small board to use as a training aid for proper impact position and using hip rotation to finish down the swing. This training aid can be used at home on days when we can't get to the practice range. I'm an engineer like you. What size board did Clay use? 1x4x2, 1x4 inch about 2 feet long or different. Sorry, Joe, I'm not familiar with the video that you're talking about. Unfortunately, I don't really know. Um, I'm not sure what video you're talking about, Joe. Sorry about that. A small board to use a training aid for proper impact position. Trying to think of what he would have done. Yeah, I don't really know. Sorry, Joe. I wish I knew. I really don't know. Hey, Joe, if you want to send me the link to the video in the chat, I'll check it out and then respond to you in the chat after a little bit. But yeah, sorry, I don't really know exactly the video that you're mentioning. And I'll do my best to let you know what it looks like he has. But your guess might be as good, as good as mine um, looking at it. So, but yeah, if you want to send me the link to it in the chat, I'll happily take a look here after a bit and then respond to you in the chat. All right. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. It's noon right now, so we'll be back here tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you all later.